Karen Allen made her film debut in Animal House, but behind the scenes, there was a moment that almost didn't happen. When she hesitated during a key scene with Donald Sutherland, it took an unexpected gesture from him to change her mind. What made this rising star agree to something she wasn't comfortable with? Stay tuned to uncover this surprising behind-the-scenes story, along with many more hidden secrets from Animal House you probably never noticed. Scene of African American. One of the most unforgettable moments in Animal House has to be the scene where the Delta fraternity stumbles into a roadhouse full of African Americans. You probably remember the awkward tension that unfolds when they realize they're in the wrong place. Well, this scene almost didn't happen. The studio was really nervous about how audiences would react. It's hard to imagine Animal House without that iconic moment. But according to director John Landis, there was genuine concern that it could spark outrage. Speaking to Cigar Aficionado in 2018, Landis revealed just how close they were to cutting it. Universal Pictures. President Ned Tannen feared that there would be race riots across America because of the scene. The climate of the late 70s wasn't exactly light-hearted when it came to race relations, and it's clear that the studio didn't want to take any unnecessary risks. But then, something amazing happened. Richard Pryor, the legendary comedian, stepped in. Landis knew that if anyone could settle this, it would be Pryor, whose comedy often tackled race head-on. He arranged a private screening for Pryor, who watched the scene and then wrote a letter to Tannen. Pryor's letter was short, blunt, and straight to the point. He wrote, "Ned, Animal House is funny, and white people are crazy. Richard." That was all it took. With Pryor's approval, the scene stayed, and the rest is history. John Belushi's cafeteria shenanigans. Another classic Animal House moment involves John Belushi's character, Bluto, creating absolute chaos in the cafeteria. Who could forget the mountain of food, the way he stuffed donuts in his mouth, and of course the famous "I'm a zit" gag? Believe it or not, almost all of that was completely improvised by Belushi on the spot. Director John Landis didn't know what to expect when they began filming that scene. He instructed the camera operator to stay with him and just let Belushi do his thing. The result was pure comedic gold. Bluto's wild eating habits, like inhaling jelly and building that ridiculous pile of food on his tray, weren't planned out in the script. Instead, it was Belushi's off-the-cuff genius that made the scene so memorable. Even the gross-out moment where he spits food everywhere while shouting, "I'm a zit," was made up on the fly. Interestingly, Landis himself was supposed to have a cameo in that scene. He was going to play a cafeteria worker who tries to stop Bluto from stealing all the food. In the cut scene, Bluto would throw Landis to the ground and say, "You don't with the Eagles unless you know how to fly." Donald Sutherland's missed opportunity. Donald Sutherland, who played the laid-back Professor Jennings in the film, almost walked away with a huge payday. If only he had taken a chance on the movie's success. Today, Animal House is seen as a comedy classic, but back in the 70s, no one knew if it would even be a hit. Sutherland was one of those skeptics. He believed the movie was going to flop. When Sutherland was offered a part in the movie, the producers gave him a choice. He could either take $50,000 up front or receive a small percentage of the film's future profits. Thinking that Animal House wouldn't be much of a success, he opted for the upfront payment. That decision ended up costing him big time. If he had chosen the percentage option, Sutherland could have earned close to $3 million once the movie became a massive box office hit. A different cast. It's hard to picture Animal House without John Belushi in the role of Bluto, but did you know the original plan was to include even more comedy stars? The filmmakers initially wanted to cast other members of the Saturday Night Live crew to star alongside Belushi. Chevy Chase was supposed to play Otter, Bill Murray was lined up for Boone, and Dan Aykroyd was considered for D-Day. It would have been a dream team of comedy legends. However, none of those actors ended up joining the movie. Chevy Chase was already on his way to movie stardom and didn't want to be tied down to an ensemble cast. Bill Murray and Dan Aykroyd had other commitments, so the filmmakers had to change course. Director John Landis, worried that the movie would feel too much like an SNL project, ultimately decided to cast lesser-known actors. The sequel that never was. Animal House was such a massive success that Universal Pictures immediately started thinking about a sequel. The concept they came up with was pretty wild. The plan was to set the second movie during the Summer of Love in 1967. The plot would have revolved around the Delta brothers reuniting at Otter's wedding. Sounds like it could have been another wild adventure, right? But as often happens in Hollywood, things didn't go as planned. When More American Graffiti, another 60s-themed comedy sequel, flopped at the box office, the studio got cold feet. Then, in 1982, John Belushi tragically passed away, and with him went any hope of continuing the story of Bluto and the Delta fraternity. Animal House 2 was officially scrapped, a hairy situation. One of the more unexpected challenges the filmmakers faced was getting the cast's hair to look authentic for the 1960s setting. Apparently, the hairdresser on set wasn't up to the task. Some reports say the hairdresser requested too much time off, while others claim they just didn't have enough experience with 60s-style cuts. Eventually, John Landis decided to take matters into his own hands. He brought the Delta cast to a local barbershop and asked the barber if he could replicate the hairstyles from the era. The barber agreed and gave all the actors their 1960s haircuts right there in the shop. Problem solved, keeping the frat house intact. You might think that with all the partying, chaos, and destruction that happens in Animal House, the real-life fraternity house used in the film would have been completely trashed. But surprisingly, the University of Oregon's Eugene building, where they filmed, was left mostly intact. The only lasting damage was a hole in the wall that John Belushi made during the famous guitar smashing scene. The fraternity that lived in the house actually thought the hole was pretty cool. They didn't fix it. Instead, they framed it and put up a plaque to mark the spot where Belushi left his mark. Unfortunately, that bit of movie history didn't survive. The building was torn down in 1986, just 8 years after the movie's release. Kevin Bacon's humble beginning. Today, Kevin Bacon is a big name in Hollywood, but back in 1978, he was a complete unknown. Animal House was his first movie, and as you can imagine, he wasn't exactly treated like a star. When Bacon showed up for the premiere of Animal House, the ushers didn't even believe he was in the movie. Because of this mix-up, Bacon had to sit at the back of the theater with the regular audience while the rest of the cast sat together. It's a funny story, especially considering how Bacon's career took off after Animal House. Today, he's one of the most successful actors from the film's cast, despite his rocky start. The University of Oregon. Here's another cool detail about Animal House that you might not know. The University of Oregon, where most of the film was shot, only permitted filming because the school's president didn't want to repeat a past mistake. It turns out that the university had been approached years earlier by the filmmakers of The Graduate, yes, the iconic 1967 movie with Dustin Hoffman, but the president refused to let them shoot on campus. He hadn't even read the script before making the decision. When The Graduate came out and became a huge hit, the president realized he'd passed up a major opportunity. So when the Animal House team came calling, asking to shoot at the university, he wasn't going to let another big film slip through his fingers. Without hesitation, he gave them the green light to film at Oregon. Funny enough, while The Graduate went on to win multiple Academy Awards, Animal House didn't get a single Oscar nomination. Still, it became a comedy classic in its own right, and the university's president finally got his taste of Hollywood fame. Animal House made 47 times its budget back. When Animal House hit theaters, no one could have predicted how big it would become. The movie had a modest budget of just $2.7 million, which, even for the 1970s, wasn't a whole lot. Most films need to make at least double their budget to be considered successful, but Animal House absolutely crushed it at the box office, raking in $141.6 million by the end of its run. If you do the math, that means the film made more than 47 times its budget back. That kind of profit margin was practically unheard of back then, especially for a raunchy comedy like Animal House, the short-lived TV spinoff Delta House. Even though we never got a full-fledged sequel to Animal House, the movie did spawn a TV spinoff called Delta House. The show aired in 1979, just a year after the movie's release. Several actors from the film reprised their roles, including John Vernon as Dean Wormer, Stephen Furst as Flounder, and Bruce McGill as D-Day. But the show also introduced a brand new face to the world, Michelle Pfeiffer. That's right. Before she became a Hollywood superstar, Michelle Pfeiffer made her TV debut on Delta House in a role known simply as The Bombshell. Unfortunately, the show didn't last very long. Only 13 episodes were made before it was canceled. The main problem? The creators of the show constantly clashed with network executives at ABC. The network wasn't comfortable with the risque humor that made the movie so popular, so they kept toning down the jokes. As a result, Delta House never quite captured the magic of the original film, and it was pulled from the air after just one season. Ivan Reitman wanted to direct Animal House. Before John Landis was hired to direct Animal House, another name was being thrown around for the job, Ivan Reitman. Reitman, who later became famous for directing hits like Ghostbusters and Twins, was originally interested in taking the reins for Animal House. He had co-produced the film and was keen on directing it, but there was a catch. At the time, Reitman didn't have a lot of directing experience. His only credit as a director was a low-budget horror comedy called Cannibal Girls. Since Animal House was a bigger project with more at stake, the producers decided to go with someone more experienced. Enter John Landis, who had just directed the Kentucky Fried Movie and had the comedy chops to pull it off. Reitman didn't get to direct Animal House, but he stayed on as a producer and went on to have a hugely successful career behind the camera. The real-life Delta fraternity was even wilder. Believe it or not, the outrageous antics of the Delta fraternity in Animal House were inspired by real-life events. The movie's script was heavily based on the college experiences of writers Harold Ramis, Doug Kenney, and Chris Miller. Miller in particular drew from his time as a member of the Alpha Delta Phi fraternity, and his wild stories were the backbone of the movie's plot. However, some of Miller's real-life stories were so extreme that they didn't make the final cut. According to director John Landis, many of Miller's fraternity tales were just too hateful for the screen. Landis felt that some of the pranks and behavior would turn audiences off, so he made sure the final script struck the right balance between anarchy and humor. The result was a movie that was wild and hilarious without crossing the line into cruelty. Meat Loaf was almost cast as Bluto. It's hard to imagine anyone other than John Belushi playing the role of Bluto in Animal House, but there was actually another big name in the running for the part, Meat Loaf. That's right. The legendary rock singer and actor was considered for the role of the out-of-control Delta brother. At the time, Meat Loaf was best known for his work in theater and his performance in the Rocky Horror Picture Show. He hadn't yet reached rock superstardom with his hit album Bat Out of Hell, which came out around the same time as Animal House. Ultimately, the role went to Belushi, and Meat Loaf continued his career in music. Still, it's fun to think about what Animal House might have looked like with Meat Loaf as Bluto, Karen Allen's scene with Donald Sutherland. Karen Allen, who would later become famous for her roles in Raiders of the Lost Ark and Starman, made her film debut in Animal House. In one scene, her character Katie is seen in bed with Donald Sutherland's character Professor Jennings. Director John Landis wanted Allen to show her bottom for the scene, but she wasn't comfortable with the idea at first. However, Donald Sutherland was a good sport about it. He offered to bare his behind on camera as well, to make Allen feel more at ease. Allen later said in interviews that Sutherland's willingness to be vulnerable made her change her mind, and she agreed to the scene. "I thought he was so sweet to do that," Allen said, "so I said, okay, if Donald's going to do it, I'll do it too." Harold Ramis was turned down for a role in the movie. Harold Ramis, who co-wrote the screenplay for Animal House, originally wrote the character of Boone for himself. He hoped to play the role in the movie, but director John Landis had other ideas. Landis thought Ramos, who was 33 at the time, looked too old to convincingly play a college student. As a result, the part went to Peter Riegert, who was only a few years younger than Ramos but had a more youthful appearance. Ramos didn't end up in Animal House, but he went on to star in and direct some of the biggest comedies of the 80s, including Stripes, Ghostbusters, and Caddyshack. Otis Day became a real-life music star. One of the standout characters in Animal House is Otis Day, the singer at the Roadhouse who performs Shout during the party scene. The actor who played Otis, Dwayne Jesse, embraced the role so fully that he eventually legally changed his name to Otis Day. Jesse wasn't actually singing in the movie. He was lip-syncing to a recording by singer Lloyd Williams. But his performance was so popular that he decided to make Otis Day his real stage name. He even bought the rights to the character from Universal Studios so he could perform as Otis Day and the Knights in real life. Talk about life imitating art. Stephen Furst landed his role thanks to a pizza delivery. Stephen Furst, who played the lovable Flounder in Animal House, has one of the best stories about landing a role in Hollywood. At the time, Furst was working as a pizza delivery guy to make ends meet. Whenever he delivered a pizza to someone in the entertainment industry, he'd sneak his picture and resume into the pizza box. One day, Furst delivered a pizza to Matty Simmons, the publisher of National Lampoon. Simmons noticed Furst's resume and decided to give him a shot. After a successful audition, Furst was cast as Flounder, and the rest is history. Exchange roles. Here's something surprising. Martha Smith, who plays Babs in Animal House, almost had a completely different role. Originally, she was supposed to play Mandy, the girl John Belushi's Bluto peeps on during the famous ladder scene. But when Smith saw what the scene involved, she wasn't comfortable with it. So she asked to swap roles with Mary Louise Weller, who ended up playing Mandy instead. This scene has been criticized over the years for its outdated portrayal of women, but at the time it was a common trope in comedies. The food fight scene without a real food fight. One of the most famous moments in Animal House is when Bluto yells, "Food fight!" But here's a fun fact. The so-called food fight barely lasts a few seconds, and there's hardly any actual food fighting. You probably remember it as a huge, chaotic moment, right? But John Landis, the director, explained that while it's a fun scene, the food just gets thrown into the air in one big shot. Even so, Animal House is often thought of whenever food fights happen in movies. That's the power of a memorable moment. Sometimes it sticks with you, even if it didn't play out exactly as you remember. Verna Bloom's improvised drunk scene. Improvisation wasn't limited to just John Belushi in Animal House. Verna Bloom, who played Marion Wormer, had her chance to ad-lib too. Her scene with Dean Wormer, where she's drunk and making a phone call to the mayor, wasn't originally planned that way. Director John Landis wasn't happy with the way the scene was written, so he encouraged Bloom to improvise. What we got was a more natural and funny performance that stuck with audiences ever since. Bloom, who passed away in 2019, had a great career, but her role in Animal House remains one of her most iconic performances. That wraps up our look at some hidden details about Animal House that you might not have known. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment below, and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on any of our future videos. Thanks for watching.